right, we're here for another incredible segment of True Patriot Love, and we're going to be talking on behalf of the pillar of housing. And we have the wonderful pleasure of having Jessica Barrett here, and she's an author of an incredible book that just launched March 3rd. We're going to give you more info at the end of this, but before we get into the book, we have to know about the author and about the mind of the author and how it all came to be. Jessica, thank you so much for being here with us.
Oh, thanks so much for having me.
Yeah. So look, we're gonna get right into your personal story, and I want to understand a little bit what did leaving Vancouver. As far as I know, you were born in Vancouver, correct? Okay. So,
actually, no, I was born in Edmonton, but I found my home in Vancouver.
Ah, okay. But you left Vancouver and you went to Calgary.
I did.
Okay, so there it is. I need some clarity, and in fact, our viewers and everyone, we need some clarity in terms of your stops and how it all came to be. Give us a little bit of a snippet of what happened there and what was the turning point for you.
Sure. I think I want to start off by saying I think my story is the reason I included it so much in the book is because I know that a lot of people can see themselves in it. It is not a unique story by any means. What I did was flesh it out with some research as to why this has happened to me and so many other people. So I was born in Alberta. I grew up in Edmonton, but I left fairly early on. I think I was 19 when I moved to Vancouver for school. Didn't really know if it was going to be a long-term thing or not. But then unexpectedly, unabashedly fell in love with the place and really found a home there and built a career there. I had actually expected to leave to have to pursue journalism as a career, but as it turned out, I got work there. I started in community newspapers. I worked up to the daily newspaper, the Vancouver Sun, and then eventually Vancouver Magazine, which is the big lifestyle magazine. And all throughout that time, I was covering housing. It was just this perennial issue in Vancouver in terms of the downtown east side, if you know the city at all, and the homelessness problem there. But then it started being not just a downtown east side problem. It started being an everybody problem. It started being a student problem. It started being a young professional problem. And so as I was progressing in my career and I was getting older, I was really looking to settle down, find a place that I could be stable, maybe think about having a kid one day, maybe have a pet. Things that are pretty hard to do when you're in an unstable rental situation. And about the time that I had decided that, maybe I am going to stay in Vancouver forever. This is my home. I have great friends here. My career is here. I have a sense of place here, is when the housing crisis got really bad. And I ended up having to leave because I just couldn't see a future for myself there.
So I'm gonna pause you right there. Sorry, this is getting really interesting. I'm just gonna grab a few things. You didn't leave because you wanted to. Just correct me if you because what I got from there is that everything was perfect, but then it's almost like your tone changed in like a way like you almost got forced to leave. Would I be mistaken, or is that correct?
Yeah, I think in some ways I did. At the time, I really tried hard to make it seem like I was making, I called it an empowered choice. And I was also very influenced by a lot of the conversation that we have around housing in Canada, which is kind of boils down to, well, if you can't afford to live where you love and where you work and where your friends are, just move to where the housing is cheaper. And I did that. I moved to Calgary where the housing was indeed cheaper. And I discovered two things. First of all, housing is not the same thing as a home. Having a roof over your head that you can afford is a big pillar of home for a lot of people, but it's not the feeling of belonging. It is not the feeling of inclusiveness. It is not a sense of connection to the landscape, to place. It may not even be stable. It may not even give you the time that you need to settle in. Because the other thing that I discovered when I moved to Calgary is that our housing crisis isn't just a Vancouver thing or a Toronto thing, it's a Canada thing. Because I got dem-evicted from the first place I rented in Calgary, which essentially they were going to redevelop the lot that I lived on. And at that point, I was really lucky. I was able to get into the housing market and purchase a home, a single family house with my partner. And once we moved into an area that has a lot of development pressure. And it actually really affected our ability to settle into this neighborhood. So even though we were stable in our housing, we could stay here long term, we could afford it. It ticked all the boxes in terms of a walkable neighborhood and close to, coffee shops and all those things that I thought made a home for me. We were having a really hard time settling in and feeling at home here, in large part, because the neighborhood was very divided over development and over what we should do about more housing. And so then the penny kind of dropped for me as well, that, even once you are in the market, even when you are secure in your housing, our housing crisis and our economics of market housing can really still deplete your idea of home and your sense of home.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Now, I have a question that keeps coming into my mind. Does home equal ownership? Like, is that the thesis here? Explain. I mean, we're going to get into deeper this into a little bit. We're going to get into this a little bit deeper. But does home equal ownership?
It does not. It doesn't equal ownership in a legal sense, but you do need to have a sense of ownership, if you kind of get the difference there.
Oh, we're gonna dive right into that one. Don't you worry. Yeah. I need a deeper explanation of it, but it's interesting. So you can feel at home. This is it. You can feel at home. Of course, you have to check off certain things. We're not going to go into the depth of it just yet, but you can feel at home without necessarily having to own the home. Period. Absolutely. That's what you're saying. Yeah. Copy that. Okay.
But I would say one of the major things that I discovered, so in the book, I write about the 7 elements of home. So these are 7 things that need to be in place for most people to feel at home. Some people prioritize some over others, but one thing that really needs to be there for everybody is the element of time, because time is stability. You can't feel at home in a place that you don't spend time in. You also can't feel at home in a place where your time is limited, like you're going to be evicted, or you think that the neighborhood is about to change drastically, and so you're kind of like eyeing the way out. And in our culture, by and large, the only way that people can get that stability, that time, is through ownership. And so there's a big problem here in our society where about 70%, 66% of Canadians are homeowners. So they have, I'll call it the luxury of time, and a bunch of people don't.
Okay. So I'm going to focus on geography right now. So you're in Calgary, you bought your house, you're feeling stable, you can afford it. Where are you right now? Where are you in the world right now, Jessica? Where are you in the world?
In the world right now, I'm in Calgary. I'm in my house in Calgary. Yeah.
Beautiful. So you ultimately left Vancouver. You went to Vancouver when you were 19. Ultimately, you left Vancouver. You went to Calgary and you stayed in Calgary. But while you were staying in Calgary, you experienced a bunch of different things. And that's what got you where you are today. You felt like you wanted to tell your story. And of course, you're a journalist. Writing is in your blood. And you're like, I know exactly how to do it. I'm going to write a book. I love it. Okay. So did I get that right so far? Did I summarize that correctly?
Yeah, I mean, I think you made the idea of writing a book a lot easier and simpler than it is. But yeah, essentially.
No, absolutely. No, I know exactly how difficult it must have been. Speaking of that, let's talk to me about just that for the authors that might be listening, right? Maybe we'll leave them with a little bit of inspiration. How were you able to focus and dive in and get the book completed, really? Because there's writing, there's editing, there's cover design, front, back, there's talking with the editors and the publishers, and there's a lot of stuff. So what inspired you?
Well, what inspired me to write this book is that I've been writing about housing, but then also I was just living it, like it just, every time I thought I was through with the chaos and the drama of our housing market, nope, there it was again. And even if it was, playing with my son on my front lawn and having realtors drive by asking if we were willing to sell our house, and the pressure that comes with the kind of, investment mentality, I just couldn't escape it. And I realized it was a book. How I wrote the book, I would say, with tremendous support from my partner and family, and a lot of encouragement, and a couple of grants from the Canada Council and the Alberta Foundation for the Arts, and just a lot of support and connections. Also from the writing world, other writers and journalists that I know that were really encouraging of me. And
amazing.
definitely a longer road than we thought it was going to be. I really do feel like this book is my second child in a lot of ways.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. They say raising a child, it takes a village. I know you've heard this before. It takes a village. I'll tell you, it's the same with a book. It takes a village to write this stinking thing. It's a lot. It's a lot of work. So again, congratulations. This is amazing. So March 3rd, it just launched. I can imagine there was tears of joy as it finally launched. So that's pretty cool. Okay. Yeah. So the next thing we're going to talk about, Jessica, is, so I saw a lot of countries. I saw a lot of comparison. I was reading, and the word Vienna came to. So sure, we're in Canada geographically, but I think you've done a really good job of analyzing other housing markets and how it's being done in other parts of the world. And I want you to take us a little bit deeper into that. So, Canada versus the world now. So what are we doing wrong? What are we getting wrong?
Well, I would say what we're getting wrong is sort of endemic to the English speaking world. If you think about it, if you actually stop to look around the world, the countries with the biggest housing crises right now are the Commonwealth countries. So they're like, Canada, the US, they're Australia, New Zealand. And a lot of this comes down to my own ancestry, my own British ancestry, and the idea of private property and private land ownership as being the pinnacle of social success, really, being, a productive member of society. And a lot of other countries in the world don't see property ownership that way. So you have in, a lot of countries in Western Europe, Austria, Vienna being one of them, also Germany, also France, also Scandinavian countries, where having to legally own your home is really not a priority for people. It is an option for some people, but you do get lifelong renters. You get a lot more co-op housing, which is a form of collective ownership. You get a lot more sort of non-market housing, and people don't really look at housing as an investment. I mean, there are still people who are real estate investors. That's what they do. There are people like that in every country. That's fine. But regular people who are just looking to keep a roof over their heads and raise their families and be part of a community don't rely on their real estate assets for retirement. They're not looking at it as a moneymaker. And in many places in the world, there is actually a cap on what you can sell housing for. It isn't allowed to go up as much as we allow it to here with market conditions. It's sort of, you can recoup your inflation and maybe some of your investments in the structure, but not more than that. And coming back to Canada and what we do wrong here, wrong is a way to, I think it's where we have room for improvement. If I can kind of put my positive spin on that, is if we think about how we think of housing in the context of pretty much every other system we have in Canada, it's bananas. It makes no sense. So let's think about housing as infrastructure, critical infrastructure for just a society. You just need to have people living in homes in a northern country. You just have to. So let's think about if we treated roads or hospitals or schools or any other kind of infrastructure that's critical to the success of our society the way that we treat housing, where one year it's going to be exorbitantly expensive and nobody will be able to afford it. You don't know if enough of it will be available. Another year, it's collapsed and everyone's pulling back. So we're not building any more roads. We're not building any more schools. We're not building any more hospitals because we just can't make a profit at it. If we think about it that way, it doesn't make very much sense. Or we're going to allow hospitals or roads or schools to charge as much as they feel like they can for people to access those services. A society really falls apart very quickly when you treat it that way. On the other hand, we look at housing as this kind of discretionary consumer good. This is how we treat it, as a commodity. So it will fetch the price that the market will bear, but it also doesn't operate to any sort of laws that we understand. Think about, the closest thing to a house is a car. It's probably the second biggest thing people are going to spend money on in their lives. You don't drive your car around the city expecting it to increase in value as you're driving it around. You don't take it to the, it's the opposite, right?
Yeah.
You don't take it to the mechanic and spend a few $1,000s getting it tuned up, expecting that to add to the price you're going to sell it for down the road. The purpose of your car is that it gets you from point A to point B, and enjoying the car, enjoying the ride is the return on investment. And we need to start looking at housing that way as well. Housing is like the experience of living in our homes, the utility of having a safe home in a nice community where we feel connected. That is the return on investment of housing. And that's what we need to get towards.
Okay. Whew. That was that was heavy. That was heavy. Okay, so basically, what I got from it, every time you kept sharing, and I just there's a phrase or two words that come to my mind, and it's wealth creation. Like that is the ideology of the residents and of the people of Canada, but even the folks that are migrating. When my mom, I was born in Venezuela, so we came from Venezuela when we were when I was 11 or 12, anyway, in 1992, and I remember that it was like we were renting, and we stayed at my aunt's house, then we rented, and she figured out how to buy a house, because that was the ultimate, like it needed to happen. It was the only thing that mattered. And it was all about that. And all it was we got to make sure that we pay the rent. And that was the ultimate status symbol. Kind of like, okay, as long as I own a home, I made it, right? So where are people getting this from? You know, and I believe in it too, but that's based on, you said it actually, a commodity, right? So if we have less, then we can sell it for higher. If we have more, and the demand is a supply and demand, right? So now there's some laws of economics here, right? And that's how it's treated. It's treated like, hey, you know, we're in the Sahara. This is a bottle of water. You know, I'm gonna. You want it? It's gonna be $40, right? But if you're somewhere where water is abundant and you don't, then you can sell it for 50 cents. So what happened? I mean, because that in my mind, it's just that. It's supply and demand, and people are using it in this economic law of, hey, there's not enough, I'm going to jack up the price. There's enough, you know. So what happened there? Can you explain a little bit more about human psychology on that perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, this is another kind of like double track answer. Yeah. So on the one hand, what happened there is, you know, our housing policy has encouraged this line of thinking from the very beginning. So if you actually look at the National Housing Act of Canada that was brought in around 1938, its stated purpose is to protect the role of the housing industry, of real estate in the Canadian economy. It is not to house Canadians. It is not to ensure that every Canadian is housed.
Imagine that.
Yeah. And so from the beginning, I read a lot about, you know, the beginning of our housing policy right through the 20th century. There was an ideological belief of the people in charge who set the policy that market economics would be the most efficient way to house all Canadians, and explicitly encouraging Canadians to become homeowners was the way to do this. Right away from about the 1950s onwards, problems with that started to arise. There has been, from the outset, at least 30% of Canadians who've not been able to access home ownership. And the way that we have we've financed homeownership has been through a lot of public subsidies. Most people don't realize this, but we put billions of dollars every year into ensuring that people can continue to access mortgages. I mean, the very first mortgages in Canada were financed by the government. Then we moved to allowing banks to sell mortgages to people, and now we insure them. But whenever housing costs get too high and people can't really access them, you'll see this sort of fleet of federal programs that will come in, whether it's tax sheltered savings accounts, whether it's sometimes there's things like interest rate relief programs, or sort of like, the government can buy a share in your home. There's all of this money that goes into ensuring that people can afford these mortgages. It also has the effect of ensuring that housing costs remain high because they're never actually allowed to bottom out. So we say that housing is supply and demand and free market in Canada, but it's actually not. There is a tremendous amount of manipulation of that market on the back end to ensure that housing prices only ever trend up, because so much of us, myself included, our government, we have so much money tied into the housing market, we cannot allow it to fail. But the problem is the natural trajectory of that is where we have gotten now, and the last few years since the pandemic especially, where it is so high. The amount of money that it takes now just to keep the whole thing afloat is quite literally bankrupting us. We collectively owe more money than our GDP produces, and 75% of that is our mortgages.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. That's interesting. I didn't know that detail about the National Housing Act. Now, so I drew a picture here of a little house, and then that my arrow goes down to construction, and then another arrow goes to sales, and then another arrow. So I'm just thinking that I'm just devil's advocating it here, but were they entirely wrong to think that one house can generate so much economic push financially, like economic push to the country? Like, were they necessarily wrong? And if they didn't do that, how would have we grown to where we are today? Like, I think it helped a lot. So it's kind of like, oh man, I get your point. At the same time, it's like, they had something right, but maybe not all of it. So is there a halfway point?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're right. Like, I'm not saying that our housing market needs to disappear or that the people who participate in it are bad actors by any stretch of the imagination. Our housing has become very lucrative in Canada. You are correct. Yeah. It doesn't feed back into our communities though, in many of the ways that we wish it would. You talked before about how, people feel financially secure in their housing, and I'm sure that they do. But if you think about the return on investment people expect to get when they sell their homes, where does a lot of that money go? It often goes to purchasing the next home, which will have gone up in price as well. So it gets eaten up there by the sale or by the purchase price of the next home, or it goes to helping your children get in the market because they're not able to by themselves. And what this does is it kind of keeps going into feeding this perpetuating cycle of prices going up and up and up and up and up. And the more money we feed into that pricing structure, that means the less credit we have available to lend to small businesses who might be creating jobs and hiring people, or purchasing intellectual property, or doing other things that allow them to scale. It means the less money we have to spend on those local businesses, and the less money we have to save and invest in other things that could create real money that we actually get to put in our pockets. So I think we just overstated the belief that the market could really shelter everybody. There is a certain sector of society for whom it works very well. There is a lot of society for whom it does not. And where we kind of, if you want to use the word wrong, where we've erred, where we have not done the things that a lot of other countries that have a better handle on housing have done, is that we have relied almost exclusively on the market, and we haven't produced a non-market sector or a non-profit housing sector. And when you say right now, like, when we're hearing a lot of developers, a lot of builders say, like, it's too expensive to build affordable housing or even market housing. It's just too expensive to build because land prices have gone up, building costs have gone up. The quiet part people aren't saying out loud is it's too expensive to build housing that still turns a 15 to 30% profit.
Yeah.
If we can take away that profit margin, go more towards a break-even model or a sustainable model, then we can start to actually build more housing that people can afford.
Interesting. Can the government have a bigger hand in that? So just the same way as they're building, like how about not privatizing the home building process and just sending out people tendering and sending out tenders and actually building houses like they build roads, and just building houses with that break-even model so that that private money doesn't need to yield a return, but rather we're building houses to solve a catastrophe where people don't have houses. Is that a possibility? I'm just spitballing here. I'm not too sure if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
Probably government officials will be like, no, you're silly. Why would you even say that? But I'm just, you know more about the topic.
I mean, that is one solution that has been like really underutilized in Canada. And so part of it is, consistent funding for nonprofit housing. And nonprofit housing, I think people need to understand, it doesn't mean you're giving housing to people for free that don't need it. Although there are some people that do need that, but it doesn't mean that you're giving things away. It doesn't mean that people aren't being paid. It just means that, like roads and hospitals and other things, the fee structure of all of the professionals who work on those things are built into the cost. And there isn't this additional profit on top of it, that kind of, this nebulous profit that gets, oftentimes carved away and leaving the country in, multinational corporations. And so, yeah, we could have a lot of that. And we have done that before. So we have a success story in Canada for building affordable housing that is sustainable and lasts for generations. And they're called housing cooperatives. And our housing cooperatives, so co-op housing was built through federal programs in the 1960s, 70s, 80s. And during those decades, we built between 12 to 20,000 units of nonprofit affordable housing per year for about 3 decades. And those affordable places to live are still around today. There are 250,000 Canadians that still live in those co-ops. And that's affordability that lasts for generations. And in a lot of cases, the government grants that allowed those things to happen were paid back. Because why? People pay for housing. They pay housing charges. They might just not be paying market rents that you could get today. They're paying often a third of that in co-ops. Yeah. But it is actually revenue generating, and the money that it generates can go back into more affordable housing. And what we don't have in Canada that other countries do have that have better housing structures is this method of putting consistent funding out there for nonprofit housing, taking the revenue from that housing and putting it back into the creation of more affordable housing.
That's exactly what I just drew up. I'll tell you what I drew. I'm thinking as you're talking, and I'm like, what if we just build? I mean, here we are thinking that we're solving all the problems, but this is good. What if we build houses, right? And then we sell them at, by we, I mean the government. The government sells them just at like 10, 15% under market value as like a way to get people in. But then there's going to be a profit, and that profit could go back into infrastructure and building, infrastructure so that we, better roads and more programs for children and better facilities and soccer fields and football fields and like the stuff that actually is going to keep us healthy and provide that, I'm going to circle back, but provide that feeling of home. I think there's more of that we need. The soccer fields, the parks, that type of stuff. I think, I haven't read the book yet. I'm going to read it. I haven't read the book, but, I'm sure you probably talk a little bit about that, right? Just fitness and health and trees and more of that around your community, programs and so forth. So now, why not? Is the question. Like, why not this? Is it the lobbyists? Is it the corporations? Is it all, greed and money that's doing this? Or do they just not know how to do it? Or like, what's happening? What have you found?
Oh, that is a great question and a very big question.
Okay.
So, I mean, a lot of reasons. I think the simplest reason right now is that we just have been doing the same thing for so long that we haven't realized or forgotten there's another way to do things.
Yeah.
And so there are a lot of people, I've talked to people in, cooperative housing, or community land trust is another model that also works, that are talking to government, and government just has no idea how these things work. They have no idea how these structures work. They're not familiar with it. Even though in terms of have housing co-ops in Canada, we were held up as an international example of how to do housing right in the 1970s, but it's been lost over generations. And so part of it is just a lack of familiarity. Part of it is, I'm going to use a bit of political jargon here. So, in the late 70s, early 1980s, the Western world really took a hard shift towards what's called neoliberalism. which is this idea of, government, small government, deregulation, cutbacks, and this idea that government is really inefficient at things like public programs for things like housing. But that's also when we got to the point where we started to kind of change our views on things. So we have kind of Ronald Reagan to thank for this idea that homelessness is a moral failing and a personal responsibility, as opposed to a structural societal thing that we can all have responsibility over and can all fix together. And so those sort of neoliberal mindsets have really taken hold in our culture over the last 40 years. And they guide governments both on the left and the right. There's sort of this idea that, collectivism of people working together to own things cooperatively or build things cooperatively can't work. But what I found in my research in all of the places that I traveled to, it's actually the only thing that works.
Wow. That's a big statement.
It is. Yeah, it is.
Okay. And that takes us to the solution that hopefully we solve everything here. Wink, wink.
Let's do it. So housing solved.
Right now, we're going to get this all solved right now. So what does real change look like, Jessica? What do we need to do? What can we do as individuals, right? Because in most cases, there's going to be homeowners that are listening to this and they're going to say, what can I do? I have my home, but what can I do to help the future? And there's going to be some people that say, well, I don't have a home because I can't afford it. What can I do to change the future? And there's going to be some government officials that listen to this and say, man, this really hits home. What can I do? So how do we start as individuals and as entities?
Well, I think as individuals, I'm going to speak to the majority of Canadians, the ones who own a home or more. And I think, what you can do first is start to sit down and really think about, does this value proposition work for me? Am I really getting what I want out of my home? So people do all sorts of insane things with their houses because they're holding off on decorating the way that they want, because they're gonna, they want to impress some future buyer that might be 20 years down the road. And you're actually holding yourself back from enjoying your home or getting to know your neighbors because they're renters and they might leave, so we need to kind of sit back a little bit and look at, is this system really working for me in terms of, maybe there's a financial payout at the end, but also where is that money going to go? But is it helping me in my life right now feel at home in my home? And if the answer is no, or maybe, let's start looking at alternatives and let's start looking at them seriously. I think there are so many people, I know there are so many people out there who would love to find ways to take their housing wealth and invest it in something that's a little bit more equitable and a little bit more affordable. So for instance, co-housing is an option that I really like. It's private market housing at the moment, where people take their private households, pool their money together, and they build multifamily housing that is designed very thoughtfully to encourage community cohesion. But there is absolutely no pathway to that and no support for that at any level of government anywhere in Canada that I could find. But could you imagine if there was something like a matching grant at a government level to encourage people to put their housing wealth into something that's more community minded, with the caveat that 25-50% of those units are affordable rental or under market, and there's a covenant on them and they have to stay affordable for generations, right? There are ways to take the housing wealth that we have right now in private hands that's been subsidized by the government and bring it back into the public good. So that's one thing. If you are, if you are not a homeowner and if you are a renter, getting to know your neighbors, joining a tenants union is a huge thing that you can do. One of the examples that I write about in the book is a group of tenants in Hamilton, Ontario, who saw that their building was up for sale, and they were really concerned, of course, that they were going to be evicted and that they would turn into higher end market housing. They were able, through grit and determination and some luck, fundraise to buy the building, and they turned it into a co-op. And so, there's a phrase out there that the cheapest housing we have is the housing that we already have. So people who are already living in tight-knit communities, or where there's potential to be tight-knit communities in housing that's already affordable, we need to find a way to keep those communities intact and keep that housing affordable. And in lots of ways, that means actually removing it from the market and turning it into co-ops or some type of public housing or publicly administered housing.
Okay, so I want to go to the renters for 1 second here, Jessica. Should you enjoy, or should you have, if you're renting, what can they do? I know a lot of people, they're renting their units, and because they feel that sense of it's not mine, they fail to decorate a wall, or they fail to get the furniture that they want, or they don't get the area rug because it's like, screw it, like I'm not going to get it. So what do you say to those people? What do you say to the people that are renting and they're failing to turn their place into home because, well, it's not mine. At any given time, we can decide to go somewhere else. So what would you say to them?
Well, like I mentioned before, I don't think that that's just a renter thing. I think people are doing that in housing that they do own now because they are holding out for the, the highest bidder whenever or wherever that might be.
Yeah.
I think this just goes back to home is more than your housing. It is more than your shelter. And so the thing is, people's housing needs change throughout their lives, right? Whether you're a renter or an owner, you may come to a point in life where you need an extra bedroom, or you need to live in a single level house. We need to be able to be building communities that have a variety of housing types at a variety of price points for people who need to change their housing needs throughout their lives, but they don't want to lose their sense of home. They don't want to leave their neighborhood. They don't want to move their kids from that school. They don't want to have to rethink how they get to work. There needs to be more options for everybody. I mean, for renters, I don't know, it's tough. In the absence of like really strong renter protection and sustainable, affordable rental across our country, you are kind of at the mercy of the market. And that's really a shame, because one of the things I write about is that, that time element. Not having that stability really is detrimental to your sense of home. And so, I guess banding together with other renters, joining a tenants union, working with municipalities, or municipalities working with renters to try to find ways to take some of that rental housing out of the market so it is sustainable forever, or affordable rather forever. I think these are pathways that we really need to be pursuing, and we haven't been doing that. And another thing I really want to talk about, which is sort of related, sort of not, is we have this kind of false dichotomy in Canada where we think that there's only two entities or two ways that we can manage housing. It's either the government does, public social housing, or the market does private housing. And they're both problematic, right? The market is going up and down and, is there at the end of the day to make money. And that doesn't work for a lot of people. Governments are really fickle. Governments change, you elect a different party in your province and suddenly the renter protections change, or the, housing funding changes. And so the model that I really hit upon that I think has so much potential is called community-led housing. And that's when actual neighborhoods, people in buildings, people in their neighborhoods find a way to come together and own and manage housing for the good of that community in perpetuity. And that is their one and only mission. And so that can mean things like managing and stewarding affordable housing, building affordable housing, but it can also mean offering things like affordable retail for small businesses and community spaces and recreation spaces, those things that you were talking about, ensuring that the money that we do make from housing, that we can make from housing, goes into community needs and is sustainable in perpetuity and not subject to the whims of the market or the government.
I just want to confirm what you named this. So it's community lot housing?
Community-led housing.
Community-led. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's
like leadership.
Also called collaborative housing, because there's a lot of ways to do it where you could maybe have some investment from private homeowners who have some housing wealth that they would like to contribute back to a community, or some land that they would like to contribute. You can have matching grants from government, and you can have investment from private industry. And this model works really well in a lot of places in Europe, and it's been cited by a number of housing organizations as something that really needs to be explored worldwide. But we're just it's very new in Canada. We really haven't been talking about it a lot.
No, not at all. I'm gonna do some research to understand. I just want to have the awareness to be able to have these conversations, and and say what should be the fix. What should be the fix? How can we help fix? I'm sure. Have you examined this deeper to see like what could be the challenges of collaborative or community-led housing, or like how deep have you gone in the rabbit hole?
Pretty deep. Yeah, pretty deep.
Really?
Actually,
Okay.
So this is like one of the major conclusions of the book, is that this type of housing and this type of building housing needs to be explored robustly in Canada. It's what we see in Vienna. It's what I saw in Berlin. It's what I saw in Zimbabwe, where I went. And it's just a really underutilized thing. And I think, we're up against a few things here, which is that we are really trying to fix our housing market to get back to a state where we feel like it's going to house everybody adequately and affordably. And when we look back at the history of Canada, we've never achieved that. So it's unlikely we're going to achieve it now. Our housing market has led us to where we are. So putting all of our resources into more of the same is a bit, the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again, expecting the outcome to change. So we do need to shift gears. And where Canada can follow the example of other countries in the world is taking more of our precious publicly funded housing dollars, and putting it into avenues that are shown to actually work and create affordable housing in perpetuity.
Brilliant. Extremely powerful discussion. Really, it was very discussion, but of course we talked about the book. Congratulations. The book is out. So folks, if you love this chat and if you want to know more, I'm going to pick up my copy and I'm going to read it, because I want to know more about how we can be the solution, how we can help, right? So community-led housing, collaborative housing. Jessica, thank you so much for taking the time. And anytime you're in Toronto, you got a home here in the studio, come on by. Let's chat. You may hear from me, because I want to be part of the solution. So let's stay in contact, and thank you so much again for your time.
That's great. Thanks so much. Yeah, and I think that's what we need. We just need more people to be part of the solution, because it's good for all of us.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Have a great day.